black or white in the reality of the world. We're not telling everyone to stop serving in the sense of volunteer projects. But what we would want to say is we want to start working towards something else. Hopefully volunteer work can serve to help educate oneself like it did with me. There's very little you can actually do with service or volunteer projects that address the root issues of a lot of these systems of inequality. So maybe it's a good first step, but we need to push further past that. So these are just some things. Maybe we can stir up some conversation and some questions. This is our contact information if you're interested, and let's turn it over to some questions.
Yes?
So I wonder, I know that the university, the UW here is really into the idea of service learning.
Mm-hmm.
It's a real big push. And I wonder, in a university context like this, how do you do it so that it's not just, going into the community, basically you get something out of it and then you leave,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, that you only have the students for a short time. So how do you make that sort of a meaningful engagement, or can you not?
Yeah.
Help me with this. Over the summer, I had 2 interns that came from universities. They were back in Chicago where their families live. They heard us about Centro. One of them actually went with Tony through the study abroad program, and she wanted to keep being invested in it. And she turned out to be a great intern because she understood that we were not just trying to create a service, that it was provided to the community, that she was there to really create relationships with them and help them achieve their goal, which is the social change that we're trying to create. And then the other intern, she did an amazing video for both Centro Autónomo and the housing movement because that's what she was interested in doing. So every single time that somebody comes, we let them know that we're not really there to create a service, or we don't want them to just come in and think that they're helping people. We never really use the word help. We are creating compañerismo there. Is equal to the people that come to Centro Autónomo. And therefore nobody should have that role that I'm gonna teach you something because I'm educated and you're not. So when they first came into Centro, I asked them what they wanted to do, what were some of their strengths, what they were interested in, and that's the way we worked around there. It really becomes their idea and what they want to do with the community in order to accomplish it. And that's really how we create that program. Because if they just come and you tell them what to do, then they just feel like they're stuck in that role. With us, there's a lot of flexibility, and we let them determine what that looks like as long as they understand that we're not really helping or creating a service, that we're there to move forward together as an organization.
And I would say that the examples of the 2 compañeras that came this last summer, a number of people come to us with the idea of doing volunteer hours or service hours. And so for us, this idea of pushing is not to say, oh, you're wrong, you have the wrong analysis. Right. The idea is to say, all right, that's what you came here thinking. And that makes sense based on what you've experienced up to this point, and what you're trying to do is the best of what you've heard of the options. We want to make another option possible. We want to make a counter offer. What if you don't come here and think about it as service, and what if you think of coming here as you've got a lot to learn from a community center that's been building and thriving for the last 7 years. And so that's the kind of counter offer that we make. And I would say as to an institution that's trying to foster the idea. I mean, a lot of times on campuses I talk with students where they're like, well, I mean, if only 10% of the students even start to care about social inequalities, where do we go with that? And my answer is to say, yeah, you have to start somewhere, but try as quickly as possible to start asking these critical questions of, where do you want to stay for a while? Where do you want to put roots down? Where do you want to go back to? Where do you want to think about being in 30 years? Because if you don't ever start thinking about that, and if we're in a university and we never start challenging our students to think in that way, we continue this perpetual motion that really serves dominant interests, and that is populations that are constantly having to move. We want people to move because they want to, not because they have to. And a lot of students, whether in high school or in college, are forced to move or feel like they have to move based on seeking out jobs or based on seeking out, a lot of times, communities. So what we want to do is, first and foremost, where do you want to spend some time? And the offer that we make to folks that want to intern with us is, how long do you have? Because if you only have 2 hours for 3 weeks, I don't know that that's going to work for us. That doesn't mean it can't work for you, and maybe you have a different relationship, but we have decided the experiences we've had with those kind of volunteer relationships leaves us feeling worse at the end. They don't necessarily learn that much. We don't necessarily learn that much from them. And so we've had to make some kind of requirements. If you're not willing to invest some substantial time over the next certain amount of time, then I don't know if this is the right relationship for us.
A couple of questions, and I also wanted to just announce something I forgot earlier, which is that around 1, we do have pizza and drinks coming for anyone that wants to stick around. They'll be here till 2 o'clock to do a little more informal discussion and have lunch with us, so just wanted to mention that. Had first of all, a quick question back to the beginning, the couple of programs you showed, the Cuba program and the ones in Mexico. Are those also, is the credit coming from UW-Milwaukee for those, or is there no academic credit?
There is.
There is credit? Where does
Yeah,
that come
it's
from?
accredited through the UAM Xochimilco. It's a university in Mexico City.
Okay.
That's recognized in the Americas as one of the most. Their programs are based on modular education, whereas like you don't have a class that's like sociology and then you have economics, but they have a modular system that you deal with economics, sociology, history, all in the same classes. They're the ones that accredit our program in Mexico, and then we have relationships in the United States with different schools that accredit our program, like the SUNY system, Hampshire schools. A number of universities have adopted our program as their Mexico program, and then there's 100 and plus more universities that have accepted those credits from the UAM Xochimilco.
Okay, yeah, and the other thing along those lines is, do you guys offer any scholarships or grants for anyone that's interested in students that want to participate in those programs?
Our organization is very small, although we do a lot of things, and we don't get any foundation grants or any state or city funding. So our ability to offer scholarships is pretty limited. However, we do internal funding of our scholarships. That means that, so this coming spring, right now we have about 8 applications for the study abroad program this spring. If that number were to get up to like 13, then we're able to see how much money we could give in the form of a scholarship to a student on that program based off of that number. But we don't have like an automatic amount because our organization is funded through the study abroad program. 60% of the funds stay with the social movements in Mexico and Cuba, and 40% of the funds come back to the Centro Autónomo and pay the rent and the bills and are voluntarily capped equal wages.
And then a question then about the presentation. I'm really honestly not that educated about this topic, so I'm just curious, with you coming out about being undocumented, did that have any, ripple effect with your family members that were undocumented? And how does one person becomes like identified and picked and deported, whereas someone else continues to stay in the United States and not get deported? I just don't really understand that.
Right.
I apologize if
No,
people
it's
do, but
definitely.
I don't.
So in my family, they really have come to use the term a lot more than we ever did before. Just having those conversations and learning about what I was doing, being on TV a couple times, and them seeing me, and their neighbors seeing them, and their friends seeing me. It has really created this effect of us being more comfortable with the term and using it on the dinner table, as you can say. But it has also created a whole deeper connections with some of the friends that I had since years from now, since high school. And even the newer friendships that I have now, where I can really be myself completely to them and be completely honest and not keep something that is such a big part of me and hide that from them, which it only creates this barrier that is always there unless you're willing to cross it. And as far as that, really what we're really trying to accomplish is, when we say the term I'm undocumented or that sentence, it has a lot of depth, especially for people that have felt the same way that I did when I was in high school, where I thought that I was the only person, that I had to hide this thing from everybody because I was ashamed. And I think that's the first thing that we like to, whenever I'm speaking, I might not know whether somebody feels that way in the room, and it's always my job to make sure that they understand that they don't have to be ashamed, that they're not the only person, that we all felt at one point or another exactly like that. And that's kind of, if I can accomplish that, even though I don't know whether that person eventually was comfortable enough to go the next day or a month from whenever they saw my presentation, they can go and tell their friend or their mom or their partner, and they can say, I'm undocumented, this is a reality of me about myself. Then I did what I'm supposed to do, which is empower people through sharing my story. Mm-hmm.
But what about the fear that comes along with that? I mean, I know, like, even as a university student, when I've been volunteering, like, students, even in the high schools here in Madison, have shared that with me, and all of a sudden there's this fear inside of me, like, wow, I know that very personal thing. Is there a reason to be afraid? You know, like, unafraid,
Right.
but still, like, it's so serious, and, like, what
Yes.
protects somebody compared to...
Right, and it goes back to the second question that you asked. I think, so what happens with ICE, and these are some of the cases that we have worked as organized communities against deportation, is that every single person that comes to us, we've been able to help them stop their deportation. And the reason why we're successful at that is because we have our community behind them. That's the first step that we always take, is making sure that the judges, that ICE, knows that they have a community behind this individual, because they love picking on the individual. If it's just one person, then you should be afraid, because it's just you. But if you have your community behind you, then you no longer are afraid, because you know that you can rely and you can trust in your community. And that's the first aspect about empowering the community, and then eventually being able to be a collective in order to stop being afraid. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, look, this is anecdotal, but I remember an incident some time ago where a group of it was high school and middle school students crossed the border of Canada, and they were coming back, and one of the students was undocumented, and they didn't want to let him come back. But somehow, I think the U.S. government intervened, and the boy was allowed to come back. And also, there were times when state authorities wanted to arrest illegal immigrants and take them back across the border, and the federal government also intervened there and said they couldn't do that. And it seems to me that the only people that are being deported are the ones that commit some sort of crime. And you have thousands of people deported every year, I know that. But I don't think it's any reason to fear for illegal immigrants who were raised in the United States, who aren't doing anything criminal, to be afraid of, because the government will not allow those people to be deported.
Okay.
Is that a policy, or?
Yeah, I have a few comments. Do you want to speak before I approach that? Because there's a lot of comments.
Well, I direct the Immigrant Justice Clinic at the law school, so I can speak to some of this, but if you want to start.
Yeah, let me correct some of the things. First of all, if we can just agree that we're not going to call, whenever we're saying immigrants, we're not going to say the illegal word. AJO has worked really hard to make sure that that word is not used when we say immigrants, because we're not objects, we're human beings. Therefore, a human being can never be illegal, and that's why we use the term undocumented.
A human being cannot be illegal.
Yeah, a human being should not be illegal.
Because you got that in the...
Because it dehumanizes us,
Oxford
using
English
that term.
Dictionary, or
Hmm?
where did you get that from?
No, it's a campaign that we did. It's
Oh,
the
campaign,
Immigrant-
okay.
And it's a national campaign that eventually came out with the term undocumented.
And actually, many media organizations, the AP Style Manual, all of those have now also, many of them are no longer using the term illegal immigrant, and the New York Times discourages it. not just, I mean, it's pretty widely accepted.
The way they also use bathroom instead of some other word. They just avoid the word.
Well, you can call someone undocumented,
Yeah.
and you can say that someone is here unlawfully.
Right.
But for example, if you, I mean, drive your car too fast, are you an illegal driver? You're someone who drives your car too fast, but that doesn't mean you are illegal.
Exactly. So I wanted to correct that. And then as far as the other cases, in OCAD, we have seen children being deported, youth being deported, being put in deportation proceedings. We've seen a grandmother being pulled over at a stop sign and being put in deportation proceedings. We've seen a mother with no criminal record being put in deportation proceedings. My cousin had been here since he was 1 year old, and he got deported.
What age?
Now he was 21.
So 20 years.
20
here,
years in the United
undocumented.
States, and he got deported.
Why did they why did they deport him then?
It was a traffic violation.
A traffic.
Also. Right.
Okay.
So is it something where a person then would become identified because of like some, I don't know, like a legal kind of thing? Like, I mean, in all these cases, did it have to do with them being?
So a lot of them were pulled over
participating,
by
taking
the
it,
local police, and then they were turned into ICE. And then ICE found out a little more about the record. They found out that they're undocumented, that they unlawfully been here, or that they have a reentry case. Reentry cases are the hardest to fight in OCAD because even though that person has no criminal record whatsoever, because they were detained at one point or another in the border, deported back, and then they came back to the United States, now they're a reentry case, and those are priority to immigration, to deport back. Even though it's simple, that's why Genoveva, the grandmother that I was speaking about with the stop sign, I mean, she just didn't stop correctly, and the cop pulled her over, and she was put in deportation proceedings. Once she was turned into ICE, they found out that she had a reentry case, and therefore they wanted to deport her. We were successful in stopping her deportation, but we almost lost her. If the community hadn't been there, she would have gotten deported after being here for 30 years, 60-year-old woman. So this aspect that it keeps going on the media that it's only the criminals that are getting deported, at one point or another, there's all this paperwork that is getting done, and cases like the reentry cases are very much a priority for immigration. It is stayed under prioritization like policies. It doesn't matter whether that person is a criminal or not, because a reentry to them is the highest criminal that there is.
So, just, I mean, I even have a problem with the word criminals.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, I've committed crimes in my life, I'm not, and I mean, look at the women and kids coming in now, right? They're being deported, and they didn't do anything other than cross the border. Sorry.
Yes.
The immigration movements that you were a part of, or still participating with, are there, aside from like the Legislative for the Dream Act, is there like a certain movement going to like, to modify the policy to get documentation, so like to help those who want to immigrate to the United States to like, to enter?
Right. So when I mentioned the DREAM Act, it was in the beginning of IYJL, so I'm talking about 2010. We did a lot of legislation work and trying to put pressure on politicians, but then as soon as that fell, we kept working on that pressure, and it was that pressure of organizations like IYJL that really got the executive order that Obama did in 2012, which is the DACA, Deferred Action for Early Childhood Arrival, which gives a work permit for anybody that arrived to the United States before they were 16, before 2012, and that is looking to get a college education or that already has a college degree. So those are the requirements under DACA. Now we're fighting for stop deportations and deferred action for all. We want President Obama to create an executive order that stops all the deportations right now of our community until the Senate and Congress can really create an immigration reform that is comprehensive enough to include, if not all, most of the 12 million undocumented immigrants that are living in the United States. Because at the end of the day, it goes back to her point that these people are already part of our communities. They are fathers to US citizens. They are mothers to US citizens. They should be allowed to stay here regardless of whether they had committed a crime or not. Because it comes back to that term that if we really believe that whether I'm undocumented or not, first of all, I'm a human being. And am I really less than somebody that has documentation or a U.S. citizen? And I don't think that I am.
Can one ever understand the gringo system? On the one hand, tolerating millions of undocumented for decades, as you documented, as you showed it. What's behind that? Is it because that's the nice cheap labor that we need? Was that behind that inconsistency?
So I think that when you start talking about immigration, it's not just an internal thing. I think we need to look even further into like policies that's been implemented to Latin America, like NAFTA. NAFTA has created a lot of problems for a lot of the people that live in Latin America that were campesinos, that they were they're just doing their crops so they can support themselves. But all of a sudden, because of the free trade agreements, they're not able to do that because there's a cheaper source for people to buy up the resources. And all of a sudden, they cannot sell their food. My parents left their fathers, their mothers, their aunts, their brothers, their sisters, their languages, their culture, because they knew that it was really hard. They couldn't keep up. And it's because of all these policies that keep putting on Latin America by the United States for decades, that they don't even know that these policies are affecting them, but somehow affected them enough that my dad decided to come to the United States and then eventually decided to bring all of us here. So yes, therefore, the immigration problem that we have here, it starts much more. We have to look way in decades before. But now, because it is a reality, we cannot just deport people. That's not an option. I think it's over.
I would say, like, going off of that, like, what I like to tell people is, we have this issue where a lot of U.S. citizens have, like, put ourselves on this pedestal, like, of course, everybody wants to come here and live the American dream and this and that. But a lot of times it comes down to the fact that a lot of people don't want to go here from Mexico, but they're forced to because U.S. companies create the maquiladoras, like the factories along the border that destroy environments, and then people feel forced to move to these opportunities that we have here because the U.S. is destroying like livable life in Mexico. So like that's kind of what I like to put a spin on that, because everyone's like, oh, it's so great here, of course they want to come here. Well, not really. Like, they love their culture, they love their people, they love their land, and like, there's other issues happening there. So.
There's a really good piece on the internet, if you look this up, it's called Designed to Kill, and it's an analysis by some volunteers from No More Deaths, an organization that works along the U.S.-Mexico border, and it lays out a thesis, and the argument of it is that the border is working very well to do what it's supposed to do, and that is to control labor, and it is supposed to be, doing what it's doing so that people, the right amount of exploitable people will come in to fuel capitalist development. And then deportations are another way of regulating labor. When you try to, foment neoliberal economic schemes that, allow capital to move freely but don't allow people to move freely, it's a perfect design for capitalism to constantly control the amount of labor in and out and be able to exploit people as much as possible. So I think it is working well for how it's being designed to work. And then the rest of us listen to a fake debate on television, whether or not the border's working well or not. It's a show. It is working how it's supposed to be working. But the interesting thing historically is that the criminal aspects about crossing the border, and maybe the compañera from the Institute could answer this, but from what I've been told from friends in Tijuana and in Ciudad Juárez is that it wasn't until the Patriot Act in 2001 that the act of crossing the border was considered a criminal act as opposed to an administrative issue. So for example, she would say that people in Tijuana and Ciudad Juárez regularly crossed the border, even though you were supposed to have corresponding paperwork that allowed you to be in a different place, that it wasn't a crime to do it. It was just, hey, you don't have the right permit to be in this area, but that people did it all the time because That's how economies and cultures work. We can't just sit still, we have to move. So I think that that's the added charge, is that, that aspect of it becoming criminalized intentionally to further serve the interests of regulating labor in a free market capitalist system.
Illegal entry has become the most commonly prosecuted federal crime.
Jeez,
Yeah.
So the fence at the border is really a lie.
Well, it's a lie that there's actually a fence, like working as a real fence. That's a lie. I mean, the amount of territory covered by a fence is so minuscule, it's absurd. But they've put up fences in the most common crossing period points so that the only people that get through are in places that are so hostile that many people die trying to do it. And that's its own natural control at the border, which is absolutely inhumane.
But I think the pizza's here, so if I mean, unless you want to